We are going to start our webinar for the day that will cover what to expect from a produce safety inspection. This is part of the effort that we have been carrying out together with the US FDA and the regional FDA office for Latin America and the Caribbean. In order to give all our participants tools to comply with the new law in the United States on food safety. We would like to welcome you all, and we would like to thank you for being here with us today. First of all, before we even start, we would like to share a couple of recommendations. Firstly, we are not going to receive questions directly from the participants voice-wise. We instead ask you to please enter your questions on the chat, write those down there. And secondly, for the participants, the Spanish-speaking participants that we have today, we are going to close off your microphones to not interfere with the presentation made by our speaker for the day. You will realize that all microphones will be on mute. Additionally, the presentation we will have today is a very important presentation. It may provide you specific information on how to go about an inspection, but it would be very, very important and valuable to have an interaction. All your questions, please pose all questions you can to our speaker today with matters related to a produce safety inspection. We have already received many requests from different countries to discuss this subject matter, and therefore I urge you, please take advantage of this opportunity to pose all your questions through the chat. We would like to warmly welcome our speaker for the day. And for that, I will offer the floor to Jason Cornell from the US FDA office in Latin America and the Caribbean, with whom we have been coordinating and organizing the series of webinars. Thank you very much. Good morning, Jason.
Very much. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon for those in South America. My name is Jason Cornell. I'm with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's Latin American office in Costa Rica. Welcome to the 6th webinar in our series about the produce safety rule and what to expect, as well as the import process. Today, we have an investigator or consumer safety officer from the FDA who will be presenting about what to expect during a produce safety inspection. He'll be covering the preparation, the etiquette, the process, and ultimately what takes place during these inspections. But we really want to focus on questions from people that are attending the webinar. So please send us your questions for Byron to answer during this webinar. As always, I want to thank IICA's technical staff, coordinators, and experts for making these webinars successful. Please share the announcements with your colleagues or interested parties. We have one more webinar that will take place at the same time next week, and we will be covering the FDA importation process, as well as FDA import programs and how they affect people that are suppliers, producers, or farms that are sending their goods to the United States. Thank you very much. And Byron, you are free to begin your presentation.
Thank you, everyone. It's an opportunity to talk with everybody. I'm looking forward to it. And as Jason pointed out, please put your questions into the chat room and we will try to answer them as many as we can. I did collect a few questions from Jason before I started, and I've built them into the presentation. So hopefully we can cover everything you need to get familiar and comfortable with where we are as far as the produce safety rule implementation. So the idea here is that we're going to go through a quick agenda, and we will definitely leave time for questions and comments. We'll start with that actual produce safety rule inspection. Then we'll talk a little bit about the enforcement discretion, what's going on within the United States based on FDA guidance documents and actual enforcement discretion. And then we'll talk a little bit about compliance and enforcement. What are we doing and how do we think we're going to approach taking action against farms that aren't in compliance with the rule, and what's our steps there? We also, as a general reminder, you've seen them before, you'll see them again. We've got some resources at the very end, and then we'll end up with questions. So why don't we get started? If I'm going too fast or I'm going too slow, let me know. I tend to get very chatty and go very fast when I'm thinking everybody's hearing me. So I will try very hard to slow down a little bit and give you an opportunity to take a look at the slide and understand what the slide is. You have seen this slide before. This is really about a timeline of when the different parts of the produce safety rule are in compliance. That means when farms have to be coming into compliance. And so what we're looking at is farms that are small have to be in compliance in January of 2019. So we started doing inspections for those large farms in 2018 or 2019, and we'll start working on small farms in 2019. That's that enforcement discretion we talked about, whereas the farms still have to be in compliance, but based on education, outreach, and training, we, as part of our educate while we regulate, asked and got the inspections pushed back for 1 year. So we started doing large farms in 2019. Then that's farms that are making over $500,000 annually. Then we'll look at the small farms, that's $250,000 to $500,000 annually. And then we'll look at very small farms in 2021. But if there's an outbreak, that's what we call a for-cause situation, the states and or FDA would inspect as needed. So if there's an outbreak of salmonella associated with some product that's being grown on a farm, then FDA will come out and start to investigate based on the conditions as we find them. We have done that in a few places, but typically we're still dealing with large farms, and we'll talk a little bit about the findings that we've seen on some of those large farms and some of the violations that we've observed later yet this morning. So we'll get to those in a second. Key principles, again, whether it's domestic or international, we want to utilize that risk-based approach. We want to prioritize and allocate resources. That's one of the reasons why we start with the large farms first and then go to the small and then the very small. Who's producing so much food that it could make a lot of people sick, and that's the starting point of prioritization. Other things that we may look at in prioritization include what their training is, what their past experience is, what the commodity is that they're growing, and all of those different types of things that would go into some type of a risk assessment for the firm. And then we really do want to invest in specialized training and implement that produce safety in a way that we want to be consistent in how we do the regulatory approach. So that if you are in the state of Florida or the state of Texas or the state of Michigan, you're going to get the same regulatory approach and some of the same decision-making points. So one of the things that we've been working hard on, at least in within the United States, is that very specific concept of consistency across state boundaries, so that we're working on training of staff, developing new forms and how to use those forms, policies and procedures that support that use of the form. So we want to be consistent. And the same thing is true, we want to be consistent overseas and when we're doing inspection work outside of the country as we are doing inspection work inside of the country. And that is part of my job as an inspector and investigator, to go out into Latin America, Central America, Europe, and Asia, and do that inspection work as best we can. The other thing about the rule is it does allow flexibility. It is not a rule that is black and white. It says, here's the standard we need you to meet. How you meet that standard is your business. So Farm A can choose to do A, B, and C, and Farm B can do 1, 2, and 3, and they're not going to match at all. But as long as they're producing a safe food and making that food in a safe manner, and growing that food in a safe manner, then they're going to be in compliance with the rule. So the flexibility is there because large farms, small farms, complexity of processing, there's no way FDA could write a specific rule that covers everything from apples through sweet potato, or not sweet potatoes, but watermelon and cantaloupe and berries and peaches, and have one rule that does all of that. That's why it's flexible. So it needs to think about the diversity and complexity of the produce farming community. And again, we want to definitely keep working with the farming community. That's one of the things that I've been tasked with, is working with other government agencies, academia, and other partners, extension agents in the United States, and the Latin American office, etc., because we want to make sure that we're being consistent and we are applying the rule equally for everyone. And we do recognize that the role of the marketplace in the influence in expanding industry compliance within the produce safety rule. Probably at this point, you're starting to see a lot of audits going on, and more audits will start taking place, because the buyers of the produce are going to say, you have to be inspected, and we want you to have this audit so that you can sell to our community. And the other thing that we're starting to work on and figure out is, how do we measure public health so we understand the successes, such as that reductions in produce-related foodborne illnesses? How do you measure that? We've got to think about that and work on that. That is one of the most difficult questions we have sitting out there, is how do we talk about food safety and develop a way to measure something that, if the farm does everything right, then they won't have any foodborne illnesses. How do you measure that? And what does that look like? So we're working on that too. So this is still very much a process that's ongoing, and we are nowhere near an endpoint on metrics, understanding the role of the industry compliance with the produce safety rule in the marketplace. And we still are keeping out there and working with our academia and other partners on how to get to the farmers and how to help the farmers grow in their knowledge and understanding of the rule and what it means to them. So, an inspection. What's the objective of an inspection? It is to facilitate compliance through that standardized, education-focused regulatory inspection. Standardized means a very specific thing. That means we're trying to be consistent in every place that we do an inspection. Education focused. That's a new process for some of us in the regulatory world. It's reaching out and saying, help me understand what you're doing, and I'll help you understand what the rule says about that. And then we're going to want to make sure that our inspection reports give guidance where appropriate, and or educational references. That doesn't mean we're being their consultant. It means that in order to comply with the rule, you'll have to be able to meet this standard. And the standard is no E. coli in the water that you're using for washing fruits. That's what we're talking about when we say guidance. Educate before and while we regulate. As we go through, if I see something and I know that that's a problem, and I've seen someplace else where it's been a problem before, and I've looked for an answer or help identify some practices that may help the farm change, I'm going to walk them through some of that discussion of previously I saw this and this is some of the things that I identified or have been identified to me as ways to approach it. Again, we're not telling the farmer how to fix it. We're giving them an opportunity to take a look at some different ideas, and then they figure out what works best for them. Because again, they're going to have to implement it and keep it going on their farm, and that is the most critical part of all of this, because if they can implement that change and they can do it, then they're in compliance with the rule. And the hardest, what I've found and seen over 30 years of inspection work is the farmer or the person who's doing the change has to want to do the change. So it has to be something that they see that will work for them, will work for the farm the way they're processing and growing produce on the farm, and it has to be something that they want to do. We'll again collect and identify data. We're looking for regional trends so we can do some targeted outreach. We can identify some educational things that we want to do. And then also asking for the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition at FDA to do some research and help adjust our work plan prioritization based on what we see. And again, we want to keep developing the relationships between the produce farmers and the local produce safety network staff and regulatory partners. I'm one of 14 folks who are part of the Office of Regulatory Affairs Produce Safety Network, and I'm tasked to work with both the states who are doing the inspection work, the states that aren't doing inspection work where I'm going to do the inspection, and trying to figure out how do we do this cooperatively and in a manner that helps support the farms as they grow. And if we need to, part of my job is to initiate that legal action, because we can't have people selling produce that's making people sick. So how do we do that? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And again, we talked about the enforcement discretion period. Again, FDA does not intend to enforce provisions as they apply to certain activities, including the written insurance provisions. So FDA said, we're not going to enforce water right now because we need to figure out all of the different things that are going on within water supplies on the farm. We're not going to be enforcing some of the biological soil amendments of animal origin. That's the manure and the composting of manure, because we don't have enough science to support some of the things that we think we need to do. And the written assurances are, if you're a farmer and you're growing, say, green beans, but all of those green beans are under contract and going to a canning company, you're supposed to have a written assurance that all of your green beans are going to that canning company, and the canning company is going to send you a written assurance back that says, yes, they all got here, and yes, we are cooking all of those and canning all of those beans in a can. So we're trying to give the growers time to understand what the details of the rule are, so that they can develop a better plan and make sure that they're still meeting the rule, and making sure that the customers, that's the end consumer, is getting a product that they know it's been held and grown in a manner that's supported by the produce safety rule. Again, those customers and others, therefore, are required to comply with all the other applicable requirements in the federal, state, and local laws, including that prohibition against introduction of adulterated food into interstate commerce. So if they intentionally adulterate a product with some type of chemical or pathogen or manure, then that is grounds for the ban against moving that product into commerce and taking some action, whether that's an embargo or a seizure or following up, but getting it out of commerce. So that's what we're working on. That's always the background of we want to make sure the food is safe. So we talked a little bit about the rules and all the different stuff that goes into it. Now let's start thinking about what do we need to do when we go out to the farm. So what we call that is farm etiquette. You want to be able to understand what the farmer is doing. So you need to be flexible. If you've been on one farm, you've been on one farm. The farm next door, even though it's owned by the brother of the guy who owns the farm you're on, is going to do something in a different way, and it's going to be different based on what they're doing. So flexibility, you have to understand. The other thing is, understand the availability of the farmer and be flexible as you plan your inspection. I don't go out and say, I need to be at this farmer A on farm A at 9 a.m. on Monday morning without calling them ahead of time to find out, at farm A, do you actually have produce that you're harvesting and growing? Because if they don't have produce that they're harvesting and growing, it doesn't make sense for me to go out and do an inspection. So you got to be flexible. You got to understand what they're doing. You got to plan ahead. That does involve calling ahead. That's kind of a very different thing for inspectors to do and for FDA to do, is that call ahead. But we're going to do it because it helps us plan for the inspection. You know, the farmer will be there. They know that you're coming. You know, be observant of the rules and plan your activities. You know, what's the farm practices? Do they have a specific rule? Where do they want you to park? Where do they want you to drive? What do they want you to drive? You know, there are specific farms where I have not, but one of my compatriots was asked to essentially climb into a Tyvek suit that they supplied, boots that they supplied, gloves, hat, hairnet, beard net, glasses, essentially everything that he wore to the farm. They told him they were going to supply him with a whole new set of clothes so that when he went into the greenhouses, they would be comfortable that he was meeting their definition of biosecurity. That's one extreme of it. The other extreme is you can park by the road. Here's where we're going to meet. We work out of our house, so we'll meet on the back porch. When you get here, knock on the door, and we'll come out and we'll have a conversation, and we'll get started doing the inspection. Wear appropriate clothing. You know, if you're going to go on a farm, and you know, wear shoes that are able to be walked around in the farm. Wear appropriate pants, shirts, you know, hats, sunscreen, apply sunscreen, all of that kind of stuff. It seems silly to say it, but yet I have seen people show up to do a farm inspection wearing, you know, not quite high heels, but pretty close to high heels and a dress. And that's a little tough to do an inspection on a farm in if you've got to bend over and get underneath and start looking at stuff. So wear appropriate clothing. You know, if you know it's going to rain, bring your rain slicker. You know, bring a raincoat. Understand if it's cold and they're asking you to come out at the very end of season and it's cold, bring your winter coat and gloves so that you aren't freezing by the time you're done with your inspection. So pay attention to what's going on. We did get a question that was, what time on the farm, when to start and end, and how long? Well, we typically try to give the farmer, hi, my name is Byron. I'm here to do an inspection. On the phone call, we'll say, what time do you normally start in the day? Okay, I'm going to be driving from such and such. I will try to be there around 8:30 or 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, depending upon what works. Give the farm time to get going but at the same time, you do want to be there to watch them get going. When do you end? When you're done. Sometimes that may be, you know what, it's 5 o'clock, we've been going at this all day, we've covered about half the farm, I'll be back tomorrow morning, we'll start again at 8:30 and we'll go until we're done. If we can get done at 5, great. If not, then we'll make a decision tomorrow afternoon about whether we stick around for another hour and close it out, or we come back to day 3. That gets to the duration question. How long? As long as it takes. You know, if you've got a big farm that's spread over a lot of area, it may take longer. If you've got a small farm that has very complex settings and lots of different plantings and lots of different ways of managing the water and the irrigation and all of the things that they're doing, that may take longer too. Size does not determine length or duration of the inspection. It's going to be walking through and knowing the rule and making sure you're hitting all parts of the rule as appropriate for the farm that you're on. And again, that's being flexible, helping the farm to understand that, you know, give them an idea of, you know, I've been on this kind of a farm before, it covered this many acres and it took me this long. So that's kind of a ballpark, but also be honest with them. It will take as long as it takes. You know, so don't get too worried about getting there. I think the biggest thing is be polite, set a time, show up on time, and not too early. You can be a little early, but not early. You know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Anything more than 15 minutes early is kind of pushing it. So I'd say that's kind of your outside parameter, because the farmers you told them you were going to be there. You know, don't screw, you know, their life up by showing up an hour early and expecting them to drop everything and be there. They may not even be out of bed yet. So be polite and be flexible. Biosecurity. If the farm has biosecurity requirements, ask about them. Understand what their minimum biosecurity practices are. That also means that, you know, follow their protocols. If they say we want you to clean and sanitize the vehicles before you get on the farm, then do that. That means you have to find a car wash and wash the outside of the car and then spray it down with a sanitizer. Then do that. Understand the equipment you're going to need. We bring the equipment with us. You know, we bring boots and boot washes and scrub brushes, etc. You know, if you're going to go into greenhouses and other types of confined spaces where they're very particular about it, they're going to have biosensitive areas. They're going to want you to put on boot covers and or overalls or Tyvek suits or something of that nature. Follow what they tell you to do. And the other thing is, you're on a farm. Be aware of, you know, the large equipment use. And if they're also having animals, understand how and where they move the animals. You know, don't get caught up in getting gored by a bull or knocked over and trampled by a bull on a farm that also has cows. So be aware of that large equipment, the weather conditions. You know, if it's pouring rain, you're going to have to follow your country and your state or province's requirements for weather conditions. But, you know, understand what those are before you walk on the grounds. And then don't be afraid to, you know, if it's thunder and lightning and you're in the middle of a field and you're the tallest point in the field, get out of the field. Don't do an inspection and get yourself killed. You know, be aware of the weather conditions and other hazards, especially if there's flooding or something like that, flash flooding or something. Watch and be aware. I want you to be safe when you're going out on the farm. All right? Does FDA bring their own safety gear? Yes, we do. I did mention that earlier. We bring our own safety gear. We bring our own boot cleaner, scrub brushes, gloves, all of that. We wear what the farm asks us to wear. And if they want us to wear boots that are sanitized, then we will sanitize them. And we will ask where we dump the sanitizer when we're done. So we're going to follow the minimum biosecurity practices that the farm has in place. So we will ask and we will do it their way. All right. Scheduling. You know, we're calling ahead so that we know what the farm is growing. And then we want to confirm that they're actually covered by the rule. What size of a farm are you? What types of produce are you growing? Is it covered by the rule? Is it generally eaten raw? You know, if all of your green beans and all you grow is green beans and they're all going to a canning company, then probably I would want to deprioritize going out and doing an inspection, because that farm is essentially exempt from the rule because they're selling all of their produce to a canning company. We want to verify that at some point, but to begin with, in conversation, that's what we want to do. How big is the farm? What products are you growing? What time of year are we going out? Is it going to be blueberry season, or is it going to be green beans, or is it going to be squash or tomatoes? Confirm what the season is and what to be there. Plan the inspection schedule to see observed covered activities. We do want to try and see the growing and harvesting of produce. We want to actually observe what they're doing on the farm. How are they irrigating? Do they irrigate? How are they harvesting? Is it by hand? Is it by machine? What does those machines look like? How do they clean the machinery? When do they start harvesting? You know, some places, leafy greens grown in the desert, they may get harvested at 3 in the morning. So if that means that's when they're harvesting, then I will be there at 3 in the morning to be there when they harvest. You know, so I will work my schedule around their schedule based on their needs. So plan ahead. So you want to observe the covered activities. And then identify what activities and covered produce will be inspected. And then definitely be flexible to the variability of farm operations. Who's in charge? Who's going to be going with me on the inspection? It doesn't have to be the farm owner. It could be the farm manager. It could be the farm food safety manager. Those may be 3 different people, or they may be 1 person based on the size of the farm. You know, establish that inspection date and time. You have them on the phone, confirm, yes, we're going to be out this day. Are you going to be there that day? And if they say they are, then yes, great. If they say they're not, then hopefully they're going to tell you why they're not going to be there. You know, and if it's something that they have planned, like we're going on a visit to my family because it's a wedding anniversary for my parents, probably you can say, you know what, we'll reschedule. When are you free next? And reschedule to that. So be some flexible, but you are establishing an inspection date, time, and location. Where do you want me to meet you? Do you want me to meet you at the farm, at the house, or at the packing shed, or out in field number 2, which is 10 miles from the house? Where do we want to meet and what time? So make sure you get all of that detail figured out. That is definitely one of that conversations when you're on the phone with the farm, getting ready to do an inspection. Invest time in preparing for the farm on what to expect. Take some time out once you've identified what the product is and what you're going to be looking at. And if you've never seen it before, talk to people who have been on farms and have seen it in growing stages. Identify who that key farm personnel will be during the inspection. Again, we talked about establish the date, location, where to park. Identify how many people are coming with you. You know, it's a big farm and we've been asked to look at a lot of stuff. I'm going to have a team of 2 people with me. And one of those people may be coming from the public health service. And if they're in the public health service, they will be wearing a uniform. In the field, that uniform is going to be blue. In the office, it may be if we're having a different conversation, they may be wearing a white uniform or a khaki uniform. But you want to tell them that if somebody's coming from public health service, they're going to be in uniform. So it's not a surprise. That way they know who's coming, they know what's going to happen. If you're going to look at records for training or manure application or something like that, let them know that there's going to be some records that are going to need to be reviewed, and try and identify what some of those records are right off the top, so that they can start gathering them or have them on site. The other thing is, when you get there, again, part of your introductory conversation with the farm owner and the manager and the person in charge is, we are going to be collecting some records and reviewing them. While we go and do some walking around on the farm, do you have somebody who can gather these records? Great. And that way it will be a much quicker inspection based on that. So, initiating the inspection. This is the first time you walk on the farm, and it's your first impression. And I'll tell you, it is their first impression of you also. So take a minute, be prepared, and I'm going to take a drink of water here. Be prepared, dress appropriately, be punctual. I am notorious. My friends laugh at me because I'm always late. The one place I'm never late is on an inspection. I said I was going to be there at this time. I am on there every time. It helps because the farmer has a lot of things going on. They're there to make money, but they're also there to help you. Show the respect of, I will be here and I will be punctual and on time. If your state or province or country requires it, issue a notice of inspection and present your government idea. This is helping you explain why you're there, what you're doing, what rules you have that support your inspection work, etc. So in the United States, if it's an FDA inspection, I'm going to issue a notice of inspection of 483. And then I'm going to show them my ID and say, this is me, and make sure that they know who I am and what my name is. And then I'm going to walk through what I anticipate the plan is to do the inspection. And then we'll have a conversation, and we may adjust that plan on the inspection based on what their conversation is. Conduct the opening meeting, explain the inspection process. They're going to have questions. This is the first time they've been inspected. How is this going to go? What are you looking for? I'm here to look at the whole farm as a whole. I'm going to look at how you're managing your water and how you're growing produce and what the produce looks like in the field. And if you're harvesting it, I'd like to see some of that. If you're not harvesting it, I'd like to see the growing fields and how you're managing your water, etc. Those type of things. Making sure you walk through all of that so that they know what's happening. Nothing on the inspection should be a surprise to the farmer. You should have said, I'm going to be here at this time, and you're there at that time. This is what the plan is. Walk them through the plan. And, ask them to help you understand what it is they're growing and why they grow it the way they do. They are experts on the farm. You're an expert as a food safety professional. You have a different kind of thought process, and hopefully you can help them understand that thought process about why we want to ask this question and why it's important. One of the questions that got asked earlier was, should the farm take you on a tour? I tend to say no, because I'd much rather walk with a farmer and actually do the inspection and get started. I tend to start also at the dirtiest place or at the cleanest place and walk towards the dirtiest place on the farm. So that would mean that if they're packing stuff into boxes, I would start at the packing shed and the packing area where everything is clean. There's a place to wash hands and do all of that, and then walk out through and end up at where they're putting plants in the ground and or composting, putting manure down and turning it into the ground, and then forming the tomato beds or whatever, because that's the dirtiest place on the farm. So that's my thought process, and that's why I do it, because I want to go from the clean to the dirty. That way I don't can bring dirt into your packing shed, and make sure the farmer understands the actions and the route you'll be taking during the inspection. If they've got a map it out. Say, okay, you told me that you're doing this. Where do you do that? Put it on the map, and then say, all right, and then we'll start here at the packing shed, and we'll go here, 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 and we'll end up at the manure pile at the end of the day. So make sure that they know what's going on. Should the farm take you on a tour? I would say no. I think your inspection is going to be the tour. It's just one of those things that's going to add more time, and let's let the farmer do what he's got to do, and we'll focus on the inspection work. This is the actual notice of inspection. It's a pretty straightforward form. It's got the name of the farm, the name of where it's giving. It's signed by me, and I'm a good inspector. It's got the address, phone number, contact information. And what it is it says this is a FDA inspection. I'm inspecting under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and I have a reasonable right to be here to do that work. Typically, we don't issue those overseas because it's the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act that affects only firms and farms in the United States. But we will, if there's a request, we will document that we were there and what time we were there. Okay? Conducting the inspection. This is really the nuts and bolts of it. And it's not a big slide, but there's a lot of stuff on it. And I think you've talked enough about some of them that we're not going to go into details about them, but we are going to talk about all of the different parts of the produce safety role. That includes the personnel qualifications and training. How are you training your staff? Do you have records of it? If you don't have records, it didn't happen. Therefore, we want to be able to see records that show you trained. Additionally, we want those records to demonstrate what it was that you were training them on. So it has to have enough detail that says, this day we trained everybody on staff on hand washing and use of toilets and toilet paper, and that's what we focused on this day. And then for health and hygiene, how are you training staff to not show up for work when they're sick with diarrhea or vomiting? How do you do that? Again, we have a training program, and we get everybody in and we tell them, if you have diarrhea or vomiting, let the supervisor know, and then we'll get you either a different job or we'll ask you to go home. That's a tough one because that's how they make their living. But at the same time, you don't want somebody who has diarrhea or vomit to vomit in the field while they're picking produce, because it will contaminate the produce. Talking a little bit about agricultural water, while the rules are in flux right now, there are certain parts of the rule that say if you're going to wash produce, it needs to be clean water. It needs to meet the standard for post-harvest agricultural water. And that's not going to change. So that's kind of the things that we're going to talk about. And then we're going to ask them, do you have wells? Do you have surface water? If you have surface water, then you're going to need to start thinking about how you're going to sample it, what sampling methods you're going to use, etc. If it's well water, how are you managing the well water? How does the water get from point A to point B on the farm? Does it go into a pond and they get pumped? Now it's surface water, or is it delivered via an underground or a pipe? And how often is that pipe taken apart and looked at? Those are the kind of things we're going to talk about in water. Additionally, we start talking a little bit about manure, biological soil amendments of animal origin. How are you handling it? Where does it come from? Do you know it's safe? Has it been treated, composted, etc.? There's a lot of information going on there. We are, again, waiting for further guidance from the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition on it. Hopefully we'll have some soon, and we go from there. But that's definitely one of the things to pay attention to. Domesticated wild animals. You know, if the farm is using horses or oxen as a means to move wagons and or harvesting equipment, then you're going to have different concerns than if they are using tractors and combines, etc. So again, different methods, but you want to pay attention to where those domestic and wild animals go, how they're being handled, and if the wild animals are out there, thinking hogs, feral hogs, birds, that type of thing, where are they dropping their feces at? How is that feces being dropped? And are the farmers training their pickers not to pick that produce that's covered in feces? You know, what's going on in that venue and how they're managing that. Growing, harvesting, packing, and holding activities. How are they growing the produce? How are they harvesting it? Do they drop it on the ground? Do they put it in a box? Do they put it in a bag? Do they put it in a bucket? How are they moving that harvested product from the growing area into a packing shed? Or are they packing it in the field? You know, certain berries are picked off of the plant and put into a clamshell. The clamshell is closed, and that goes directly to the grocery store and or the consumer. So there's very little managing in that product once it's picked. You know, and how are they holding on to it and cooling it? Are they cooling it? Aren't they cooling it? What happens when they're washing the produce? You know, if it's apples or pears, do they wash and wax them, or do they just wash? What's the water that they're using to do that? And then what are the chemicals that they're using in that process, et cetera. So paying attention to all of that. And then, is the equipment, tools, buildings designed to be clean? And are they clean? And how do you know that? And taking a look around and following through, you know, where all those belts go. Are they using rollers that are brushes, or are they rollers that are hard rubber, or are they rollers that are foam? You know, what's the difference and what's the concern about that? So we want to pay attention to that stuff as we're going through the farm. But again, each of those is outlined in the produce safety rule. I would refer you back to those. And then we'll talk about the 4056. That's the inspection form that we're issuing. And we'll talk about that. Question that came up was, what about photos during the inspection? Photos are, a lot of places say, we don't want you to take photos because it's a secret. Except that photos are part of your inspection tools. A picture tells 1,000 words. So we want to take pictures, and legally we're allowed to take pictures. They are part of our inspection. If you look at our investigations operation manual, it talks specifically about photographs and when to take and how to manage them. So the expectation is that a camera will be part of your inspection equipment, just like a flashlight, just like a thermometer, just like any of the other tools that you have, including boots and a hat and a sunscreen. That's all part of doing an inspection and doing a thorough job of it. And there is actually case law in the United States that specifically says that photographs may be lawfully taken as part of an inspection. That's what these two things on the screen are. Dow Chemical versus United States. That's the actual case. United States of America versus Acri Wholesale Grocery Company and Acri Dad and Brothers. Basically, both of those said that part of an inspection is to take pictures, and no, you cannot tell an inspector not to take pictures. Excuse me while I take a drink. So photographs are part of your inspection. Please make sure you take them. They will help you do an inspection. If the farm has really anxious about it, let them know. You can take a picture, same thing I take a picture of. Get your camera out, and I'll show you what I'm taking a picture of, and I'll explain why. And you can take the same picture so that you know that nobody's messing with the pictures, and you got the same picture that I have. Okay. So we spent a day or two on the farm already, maybe 3 days. Now we're going to start getting ready for that closing of the inspection. We've conducted the inspection. We've figured out what we're going to write. We've started writing our report up, our form FDA 4056. We have some observations. We want to make sure that the farmer understands what we're doing. And because we've worked with the farmer and or the farm manager all through the inspection, nothing they see on the report should be a surprise. You should be talking with them all through the inspection about, you know what, I have some concerns about how you're managing the irrigation water in this part of the field, because it seems like a lot of the emitters that emit the water are broken, and that water is spraying up into the trees and onto the fruit as it's growing. And you're telling me that that water never comes in contact with the fruit. That's a problem. They shouldn't be surprised at the end of the day that that's something you talk about and write down and educate them on why that's important. So make sure that you're doing that. And if you've got anything additional, supportive materials that were gathered that may be used to clarify the observations, that would be pictures or whatever, make sure they understand what you're doing and why. And then if you've got stuff to give to them, document that you gave it to them. If you've got a cooperative extension from a university that says, here's some guidance document on how to grow peas in this particular climate, and it has something of value, then, and you hand it to them, document that you handed it to them. I gave Farm B handout C from Cooperative Extension on growing peas in this region to address blah, blah, blah. Document that. So because, if we're going to ask them to document everything that they're doing, then we should be documenting everything that we're doing. So again, they don't get surprised. Again, Form 4056 is new to FDA. It is unique to produce farm inspections, and it does replace the traditional FDA 483. It will get issued at every produce farm inspection, and it includes a corrective action notation. So on the form, as you go through, and I'm sorry, I tried to make this bigger, but I can't. It is available on the net. What it does is it also gives the farm a walkthrough of everything that you've looked at with the rule. So it asks the question, does the farm have a employee health and hygiene training program? Yes or no? Yes, they do. No, they don't. Or yes, they do, but they haven't documented it on a record. So you document what you see, you write down the observation. The firm lacks records to support their employee health and training program. So we don't know what day they were trained or what was part of the training. Firm said that they will correct that at the next inspection. And that's really the important thing. This form includes this right here, a corrective action notation. So if they did something while you were there, or they tell you they will do something, document it. They picked up all of the brooms and mops in the packing shed and put them in the sink to be washed because they were in contact with the floor and they needed to be sanitized before they were going to get used. Document that they did that, if that's important and if that's part of the rule. And again, same thing is true with this FD 4056. You've got a lot of information. Help the farmer understand it. It also helps him or her to see all the different things that you're looking at It's about 8-9 pages total. So there's a lot of information on it, and it's a really good tool. Again, you can see it on the web, and hopefully you can get it from the FDA Costa Rica office as needed. Okay, so we've done this. We're working through issuing our Form 4056. That's the end of our inspection. So once the inspection's done, then we're going to talk about compliance and enforcement. But the first thing is right now, because this is a brand new rule and because farmers have never been regulated this way, these first inspections that FDA is doing and the states are doing are educational. We really are trying to educate before and while we regulate. So the key word here is unless egregious conditions are found. That's many words, sorry. Unless egregious conditions are found, it's an educational visit. The next inspection will be more regulatory. If there are egregious conditions, that would be something like there is sewage running across the field and into the tomatoes that are growing on the ground, and they're picking tomatoes to put them in a basket to sell. That's an egregious condition. We will stop those tomatoes from being sold. We will document that there's sewage running across the ground. We will take as much action and enforcement as we can, because we don't want the produce that's contaminated with human sewage to go into the marketplace. But unless we've got conditions that bad that will cause people to get sick right away, we're going to try and be educational first. You know, you need to develop better records. You've got to, you said you have a plan, you see you're doing training. I don't see the records. Let's make sure that we have the records for our next inspection. The Produce Safety Network, which I work for, our compliance will be coming from the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. They've got specific staff assigned to support the produce branch, and that's who we're going to look for as our experts on the rule and how to interpret the rule. And then the states will be managing compliance on their own, but they do have access to a regulatory TAN, which is a network, my brain went to lunch. I'll get back with you on that, for support, so they can get some ideas about what to expect and asking for help without going out there. Again, some states will operate under FDA credentials, and that means that CIFSAN will be also their compliance person also. That's specific to the United States. When we go out and do inspections in the field in Central Latin America, foreign inspections, they will come back to, that will be FDA doing it directly, and it will come through this Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition on what we're going to do for enforcement of the rule. Again, a written final inspection report is required. So that means that once we've issued that Form 4056 and a state-specific or an FDA 482, then we're going to document all of this in one report that says, here's what we found here, here's what we issued here, here's any samples that we picked up, any other pictures that we took, any other documents that we got copies of to support the inspection itself. So it's going to be a little longer report with a little bit more detail on it. So, but that is how FDA will be doing it. Your state or province or country may have a slightly different take on it, but the goal is, at the end of the day, the farmer knows what's happened and nothing is surprising them. So again, this is the FSMA Technical Assistant Networks. That's the TAN, Technical Assistant Network, and it's designed to provide scientific support. Part of it's facing out to the public, part of it is facing to the regulatory folks. That's this in the center. And then Out here, we're talking about extension specialists, land-grant universities, international partners. That's our preventive controls, TANs. So we've got a couple different folks who are a part of it. Again, this is something you've seen before. This again is the FSMA final rule on produce safety. It talks about the final rule, the related guidance, where we're giving, discretion, compliance and enforcement discretion. Talks about where there's webinars or training, supporting materials, any additional information. A lot of information there. Check it out if you have any questions that you want a quick answer for and don't want to wait for getting a hold of somebody from FDA, etc. So, what are the most common challenges for investigators? This was a question that came in. The biggest thing that I saw was helping the farmer understand this is an inspection and it's not an audit. We're going to be out here doing inspection work. And that means that we're going to look at the whole farm. We're going to look at all the pieces and parts that are covered by the produce safety rule. And that is different than an audit. An audit is one of those things where the farmer can say, I want you to audit my tomato growing. Ignore the cucumbers and the squash and the watermelons. All I care about is tomatoes because that's what my buyer wants me to audit for them. So that's the thing there. Farms struggle with most has really been the breadth and depth of the produce safety rule. They're a little overwhelmed and they're a little concerned that they're not meeting all of the requirements. So they're concerned about the water. Well, I know you're not worried about water yet, but I want to start testing my water, making sure it's right. What test should I use? Well, there's a lot of tests to use, but that may change. So I can't give you a lot of great answers. So that's what we've been focusing on there. From a different perspective, let me go back here to the end. Contact information is available. So we're going to move into the question and answer period. And before we do that, I'll go through a couple of quick things. I am currently acting for Brandy McGrady. She's off on maternity leave. So if you need to get a hold of somebody from Branch Chief 1, that would be me. I'm her acting at this time. Brittany Nork is our other produce chief. She's on the West Coast in Denver, so she's available. I'm available in the morning. She's available in the afternoon. But typically, you'd want to work through your established chain of command and reaching out to them. But if you do have questions, we're open to questions. Let me go to, sorry, I'm trying to make that small. So I've also been asked to do a couple of different presentations. So I figured might as well walk you guys through it. So how are inspections going in states? Number of planned inspections, we had 180 domestic and 40 foreign. Natural disasters in Puerto Rico with the earthquakes, we're not probably going to get to all 180 done this year. We are on track to meet our foreign inspection numbers. The 4056, 6 have been issued, 3 domestic and 3 foreign. That means that 6 were issued specifically with violations observed based on egregious conditions. They were harvesting produce with animal manure on it or something of that nature. The top citations: hand washing, hygienic practices, toilet facilities, preventing contamination. Are they clean? Are they designed to collect sewage? Again, hand washing supplies. If the hand washing facility is not close and it's not supplied, then people aren't going to wash their hands. It's the most important thing we can talk about. they're harvesting contaminated produce. That means produce that's covered with manure or something to that effect. Again, you got to have toilet facilities accessible, otherwise they can't use them. You know, are the employees trained? That's employee qualifications. And then how is the produce coming in contact with the equipment? Is that equipment able to be cleaned sufficiently and sanitized as appropriate? Not all equipment has to be sanitized, but it does have to be clean. You know, animals evaluate harvesting methods. You know, are there birds in the field and are they leaving behind manure or feces or wild pigs or feral pigs, etc. Training for supervisors, training content, waste from hand washing shouldn't be going on the ground. It should be being picked up and held, trash receptacles, and then records we talked about in personnel. Top verbals, again, hygienic practices, food contact surfaces needing to be cleaned and maintained. Are the records being signed off by the supervisor? Somebody needs to look at the record and sign off on that. Again, and then waste from hand washing facilities, record keeping requirements, more proximity of hand washing, training for supervisors. Just because you train your staff doesn't mean you don't have to train your supervisors. And equipment and tools, are they cleanable? Are they designed to be cleanable? And then how are they managing non-food contact surfaces? We're approximately 34 hours per inspection. That doesn't include time to travel to the farm and off the farm. Doesn't include that travel. It does include all the time we're on the farm, 34 hours, that's 3 days. 8, 16, 24, almost 4 days. So depending upon the farm and the type of farm that you're at, you know, we're seeing a minimum of 13 hours and a maximum of 80. So, you know, it's highly likely that foreign farms are taking longer because of language issues. It takes a little longer when you have to translate. So some of the feedback from the farmers is they like the fact that we're being proactive, educating, and talking about voluntary corrections. One of the things that I did give you is the fact sheet on what to expect a regulatory inspection. That is as part of your notes that's out there. Make sure that you check it out. Feedback that food safety systems thinking, focus on the produce safety rule. Think about it as a whole, and we'll go from there. And that type of thing. Sorry. We talked a little bit about regulatory inspections and audits. I think we're getting there. And our farm's taking the verbal discussion items seriously. I've seen a couple of farms that took it very seriously. They were doing it before I even left. That's my experience. They want to be in compliance. And that's some of the questions that I have right off the top based on some other documents that I've been working on. So let me know what other questions we have, and we'll go back to the PowerPoint.
Hey, Byron, this is Jason in Costa Rica. We have quite a few questions here. One of the first ones is regarding photographs. And somebody mentioned that, you know, US FDA's authority that you talked about is in the United States. But what if a farm absolutely refuses to allow you to use a camera? How would you handle that, and what actions can FDA take?
I would have to verify this with the Office of Compliance, but if that firm wants to sell produce in the United States, they're going to have to figure out how to come into allowing the inspector to do their job. Now, if it's an FDA inspector, we would, first thing we would do, I would notify my supervisor that I have a refusal based on photographs. And then based on that discussion, and I would try to encourage the farm based on existing law and et cetera, you know, and I'm not going to take pictures of something that is, I'm taking pictures of something that's in violation of the law. I'm not here to do any trade secret stuff. But if you don't let me take pictures, that is going to probably affect your ability to import into the United States. I can't say it's going to stop it, but I can say that we're going to have the conversation with the Office of Compliance, and they're going to make some decisions based on that. Yeah, I recognize that it's U.S. law, but at the same time, it's kind of that if you want to sell in the United States, we want to treat everybody equally. Therefore, everybody gets treated to the potential for photographs.
Thank you. I'm going to make one clarification based on something in the slides and a question that came in regarding the Public Health Services Commission Corps officers. When they are conducting inspections in a foreign country, they do not wear uniforms. They will wear normal farm inspection clothes like any investigator. And those...
No, thank you.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
And those officers are usually identifiable because they have a rank in their communications, such as ensign, lieutenant, captain, and so forth. Now, one of the other questions that came in, I'm combining a few here.
Yep.
You mentioned embargoes and seizures, as well as we have a question about does the FDA fine businesses or charge them money for violations at the end of an inspection? So can you speak to whether we charge money, do we issue fines, and what is an embargo and a seizure, and would that take place on a foreign country's farm?
We'll start with fines and fines. FDA does not issue a fine at the end of an inspection. That goes through the compliance and enforcement process. And if there were a fine to be issued, it would go through a court before any fine got issued. So FDA would have to go to court, prove it in court, and a judge would make a decision about issuing a fine if there was a fine to be issued. So FDA does not issue fines directly. We only issue fines as part of a court activity and a part of a judge-ordered court activity. So that's the fine part of it. The embargo and seizure is going to be driven by where your state or province or country's controls over food. FDA does have the power to write an embargo or a seizure. That means that if the product is determined to be an imminent public health hazard, that means it could make people sick. If it's part of a foreign trip, we would again go to the compliance enforcement, go to the Latin American office, talk with them, and figure out what we could do to take the next steps of making sure that that product doesn't get into the market. And if it gets into the market, then it doesn't get into the United States. So coming into the United States, if we know it's contaminated, then it would be part of an import alert, and it would no longer be allowed to be imported into the United States based on the findings of what we found on the farm. But in the country of origin itself, the embargo seizure language would be up to the local food safety agency, and we would be working with them on that particular issue. Ideally, they don't want their citizens exposed to sewage-covered produce any more than the United States wants our citizens. So, you know, we figure out how to do that. And that's going to be driven by the rule of law for the country of which we're working with. So They may have something called a seizure or an embargo. They may not. They may have another way to keep that product from getting into commerce. Does that answer the basics of the question? If we do an embargo or seizure in the United States, that will also be through a court action and through a judge. FDA has some broad powers, but sometimes they're limited, and this is where we work with the judge and the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition Compliance branch on what our next steps are.
Thank you. Another question we have is a farm or a business that's being inspected, are they expected to take the investigator out to dinner and pay for their meals or pay for their hotel?
Well, they're not supposed to pay for the hotel or the meals. But I know that they do offer to take out to dinner. And, you know, if there's, when I've been overseas, I have said yes, but I've also paid for my own meal. That way, I don't want the farm to feel like they have to pay for a meal or anything like that. So it's being polite. The expectation is that the inspector will pay for their own meal, their own transportation, their own hotel rooms, and all of that. That's our job as part of being on a trip to make sure that we do. If they would like to say, you know, this is a place that we go, we'd like to take you over there for dinner, then I will offer and I will pay for my own meal. But I will definitely go with them, because part of it is you want to create that relationship and that educate while you regulate and do that. So, but no, the expectation is they shouldn't have to pay for any meals, etc. Okay.
So just to be clear, that is not a requirement of the farm business.
No, it is not a requirement.
Right. One more that we have, also a combination of questions. One, do FDA investigators carry guns on inspections? Do you ever partner with other agencies, in particular ones that are concerned about working conditions or the legality of workers? And does the FDA ever arrest employees?
FDA does not carry guns. There are specific agents within the specific people within the agency who do carry guns, but the produce inspectors, the farm inspectors, the inspectors in the plants are not carrying guns. It's a very limited group. We do not, historically, we do not work with other agencies specific to worker health, like the Office of OSHA, that's an acronym, I'm sorry, Office of Safety, Health, Inspection Service kind of folks. No, we do not work with them typically. We do work with other public health agencies. That would be a Department of Ag or Department of Public Health, who are focused on food safety. And I don't know the details about how that works within the foreign aspects of that. I know that when I was in China, we let the Chinese Public Health Agency and Food Safety Agency know where we were going and what we were doing. We did ask them to come along if they wanted to. They chose not to. But that's typically how it would happen, is we're going to let them know that we're there, we're doing an inspection. We're going to invite them along. If they choose to, great. If they don't, that's totally okay too, not a requirement. But as far as other agencies that are looking at immigration issues and or worker health issues, typically no. I can't say 100% because I don't know the answer to that. I would have to research that more to get 100% answer. But typically, no. Does that help?
It does. Our next question, and I think the final question before I hand it over to the questions that have come in on the Spanish feed. So those will, when those questions come in, they'll be coming from an interpreter, just FYI for you. The last question I have is, if a farm has biosecurity measures to prevent cross-contamination, such as vehicle wheelbase or vehicle washing requirements, when should that farm discuss that with the FDA?
Ideally, before we even get to the farm. Part of my list of things that I talk to the farm about when I make that phone call, the pre-inspection phone call, is that specific thing. Is there specific biosecurity items that you need me to do or I need to have done to my vehicle before I get there? And if there's specific places you want me to go to do that, a specific washing place, then I will go to that specific washing place to validate and get my car washed appropriately and be able to validate it before I get to the farm. So yeah, we definitely, that is part of our job, is to make sure that we're following the biosecurity for the vehicle and our persons as we move on the farm. So if they have step baths, foot baths, driving through baths, or spray wash, etc., we will do all of those or any of those based on what's appropriate for and what the farm has decided they want us to do. Okay?
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Byron, for your excellent presentation. We have quite a number of questions
Of course.
from the Spanish-speaking group. The first question is there a process or a selection criterion to identify which companies will be inspected or which farms will be inspected, and what are those criteria? And is the Latin America or FDA office involved in this process?
I don't know all of the answers to that. I can answer parts of it. Yes, there is a prioritization process. Yes, some of the different offices of FDA are involved in some of that discussion. But as an inspector, I typically get a list of farms that are going to be part of my trip, and I go and do the farms as they're outlined. And then I have some conversations with the foreign travel folks and the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition foreign folks who put those trips together. And they're basing them on past experience, different commodities that are being grown, information they gather from the local people on the ground, that would be the Latin American office, et cetera. And they put all of that together. So that's the best answer I can give you. I'm sorry it's not a complete answer or a very nuanced answer, but it's the answer I've got.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. We will try to get that information through the FDA Latin American office. Okay, the next question. The deadline to correct the findings during an inspection. Is there a deadline?
It's going to depend
to correct a
on
nonconformity. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's going to depend on the violation itself. Ideally, you'd want, the language in the 4056 is corrected as soon as possible. And the idea is that the farmer will work on it and correct it, et cetera. If there is a specific item that the farmer knows is going to take a while, and they respond in writing to the inspection report that was issued, the 4056, they can say, we know that it's going to take us 6 months to build a new outhouse or toilet facility in the field at this place, but we anticipate it will be done, and this is the standard that we're building it to. In the meantime, we have a short-term solution of a temporary porta potty that we will roll in until we're done building. So the re-inspection for that violation will probably get adjusted out to allow them time to build it. But there may be a quick follow-up to make sure that they do actually have toilet facilities available. So it's going to be based on the violation, etc. There aren't a lot of inspectors around, so the inspection frequency, we would like to say that if it's egregious or if it's a high public health significance, we will do a re-inspection much sooner than we would if it's a low, not of public health significance. So I don't have a consistent answer for that, but I will say that we will follow up at the next scheduled inspection for sure. And that next scheduled inspection, it could be a year or more out. So that's the best answer that I can give you. It's variable.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question. Is there any guidance available on a farm inspection? And if so, where could we find that?
Oops. This is the FDA fact sheet of what to expect of a regulatory inspection.
Ok, perfecto. Muchísimas gracias.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, next question. Really, 3 questions in one. If you do not have all the answers, we will try to channel this through the Latin America FDA office. How far in advance does the FDA report that an inspection will take place, and who the inspectors would be? And can the FDA delegate this on third parties?
Parece que perdimos el audio.
We lost the audio with the speaker. Give us a couple of minutes to see if we can correct that. But in the meantime, continue sending your questions. Thank you.
Hopefully I'm back. I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened.
It's all right. We can hear you, and we will begin with the questions again.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. The next question is basically for an inspection abroad. How do you go about in selecting the inspector? And can the FDA delegate this on third parties? This is a question, and if you do not have the full answer, we would try to channel it through the FDA Latin American office. Thank you.
Definitely the delegation to a third party has to go through the Latin American office for sure. I don't know the answer to that. We do work in the United States with some states. We have a cooperative agreement program for them to supply inspections and do inspection work for FDA. But I don't know that that has been rolled out to foreign inspections. Foreign inspections, the choice of inspectors is based on our training and background. So there are 14 produce safety inspectors in the United States, and the expectation is that we will all do some foreign work at some point in our, in the next year or so. In fact, I know that some folks just got assigned to go to Holland, and some folks just got back from Costa Rica and Peru. So the work is being done as we speak.
Very well. Thank you. And perhaps for the audience that is with us, please remember that this clarification is more related to how this process takes place within the United States, and not necessarily will those be exactly the same steps for an inspection abroad. That is why we will channelize this question through the FDA Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, the
Thank
next
you.
question.
Gracias también.
Okay, the next question is there a template or a checklist that can serve as a guidance in the inspection process, and that even the grower could use on the variables that might be verified?
Yeah, actually, that is what the 4056, the FD 4056 form is all about. Is it does go through each section of the rule. It has some written in questions, and the idea is that the farmer can use it to do a self-evaluation using a blank form. And that's why the form itself is available on the web. So anybody can download it and you can translate it as you see fit into the appropriate language.
Nice. Thank you very much for the clarification. Now, next. In the case of an inspection abroad, does FDA authorize inspectors to take the procedure manuals and logbooks and records off the farm to check them elsewhere?
We are authorized to make copies of, et cetera, of all of the documents that we gather, because that is part of the inspection itself, like photographs, is we're asking for copies of documents like training records and or those types of things. It goes to that, it's because it's part of the inspection. If it's refused, then it becomes a question for the compliance enforcement folks to work with the farm on because if the inspection isn't complete because we don't have those records or that documentation that supports it, then we would not be able to validate that they're providing safe produce. Therefore, would they be allowed to import it into the United States? That's kind of the, at the end of the day, question is, would it go on an import alert or not?
Oh,
Okay, thank you very much. Another clarification. Can inspectors take these logbooks elsewhere? Or take them off the farm? Or can they only inspect them there and get the photocopies there on the farm, but not necessarily take the manuals elsewhere?
Yeah, I don't, my understanding, and it is my understanding, is that we can take it back to another facility to take pictures of it or make copies of it if the farm doesn't have the ability to make copies on site. I know that one of the things that I bring with me is a printer copier to do that particular thing. But not everybody has the same tools and equipment when they go to do inspection work. So they may have to go to a local library or another facility and do that. So.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Very useful. Next question has to do with the validity of digital records and the use of digital documents through tablets, Google Form, checklists, photographs, or certifications? Or does everything have to be given to the inspector in physical paper, a physical copy?
It doesn't have to be physical. It can be electronic. And that's going to be something that the inspector has to work out with the farm directly. And they'll probably also have some questions and concerns about it and may get a hold of the regulatory TAN or the Office of Compliance. But yeah, electronic records are acceptable. We're going to want to see them in situ and then work from there. So it's not the end of the world if the farm only has electronic records. We're trying to be more flexible about that as we move forward into the future.
muchas gracias. La siguiente es referida a
The next one refers to, is there any type of document or report that the inspector gives the farmer saying what was what was their compliance, what needs improvement, and what was a non-compliance?
The 4056 actually is designed to give you both that in compliance, out of compliance functionality. So that would be one of those, I would say, take a look at the form itself and see if it provides you with as much information as you want. And then we could probably answer that question in further detail. But typically, the inspector will write down the observations they noted, what the violation was, and then whether it was corrected or not. And that goes on the 4056. And then if they didn't document it on the 4056, it means that it was in compliance. So the farm can read the report and they can see where the inspector wrote something, and they can see where the inspector didn't write something. So they kind of have a clue about what's in compliance, out of compliance, based on the form itself.
Gracias. La siguiente es sobre
Thank you. The next one is about with whom do inspectors deal with? Which is the counterpart? Is it the owner of the farm, those in charge of food safety, or both?
It could be the owner of the farm. It could be the food safety manager. It could be having a conversation with the employees on the farm, depending upon what you see and where you're at. I've done all three, and I've actually done a couple more. We try to work with the person who is most responsible for managing food safety on the farm, because they have the most training, etc. And they're also telling us they're in charge of food safety, so we try to work with them. But there comes a time when you do have to talk to the manager or the owner, and or talk to the employees and say, I was told this is what I'm seeing, what have you been trained to do? Or ask the question actually more broadly, what have you been trained to do, and help me understand what you're doing? And we go from there. So we like to be able to speak to everybody we can on the farm, but we also understand that some people may not want to talk to us and they may be scared. So we try to figure out how to have a conversation in a respectful and a respectful way, so that we don't bother too many of the employees either.
Gracias. Cuando
Thank you. When you made your presentation, you mentioned that right now you were implementing, or you were going through an educational period. The question is, how long will this period take?
A question that I don't have a good answer for. It may take longer than we think, but the commitment was that for the large, the small and the very small farms, their first inspection will be educational. That is what we've committed to. So if we've been to your large farm the first time in 2019 and we're back in 2020, then it will be a more regulatory approach. But if we didn't get to your farm in 2019 and we're coming out the first time in 2020, it will be educational. So the commitment is that every farm's first visit will be educational. How long it takes to get to all of the farms in the United States and or the world with 14 people means that could be a very long time. But the commitment is that their first inspection will be educational at this point, and that hasn't changed.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next questions, well, these are 4. I'm going to try to do them all in one. And once again, I do believe that there are some that probably we need to channel through the FDA office in Latin America and the Caribbean. The first one says, how long should records be kept, and does FDA cover for inspection costs? Should the farm cover any cost? And if in some cases, for example, for foreign inspection, do inspectors who come speak Spanish, or do we need to provide for interpretation costs?
So within the rule, it says records need to be kept for the year they were created and 2 more years, so roughly 3 years. So that's written into the produce safety rule. And that would apply to all records identified in the rule as being required. So employee hygiene, etc. FDA is covering the costs of getting the inspector to the facility and around the facility and their meals, etc., all of that costs. Typically, depending upon where the inspection is, I'm not sure of the answer of how the interpretation goes, if that is covered by FDA or the Latin American office, or if that's covered by the farm. that would be a question for the Latin American office to cover, to address. I don't know the answer to that. I know that in some places, interpreters are part of the crew, and in some places they're not. And I don't know the answer to that part of that. I'm sorry. And that was, we covered interpretation, we covered records, documents. There was one more part to that question. I'm sorry, I forgot.
No,
No, you practically covered all the questions related to that specific question. Thank you very much. There is one related to programming inspections for Central America, Latin America, and South America that I think that not necessarily you're the right person to answer to this, but if you have any comment about this, that might guide us. Thank you.
What was the question?
¿hay alguna pro-
Is there any programming for inspections in South America or Central America?
And programming, what do you mean by the word programming?
Like identification of companies that are to be inspected and the time frame for doing the inspection. Does FDA have any type of programming for the countries for these processes?
Yeah, we do actually have a foreign, a group of folks who schedule and plan foreign trips and foreign inspection trips, which includes Central and South America. So it is on their radar, and they are scheduling and planning trips as we speak. How they make that decision, I think that is a combination of past history, country, commodity, and any civil unrest, et cetera, any health and safety issues on top of that. So they don't want to send an inspector into a country that is currently having civil unrest in the capital based on, so we're probably not going to go there, but they are aware of that. So that's a question that probably could get a more clear answer by asking it through the Latin American and Caribbean office.
Thank you very much. The next one is, has FDA implemented already the inspection through the recognition to accredited third parties through that regulation?
I do not know the answer to that.
In the case of inspections abroad.
I'm sorry. I do not know the answer to that. I do not believe that they have. But they're definitely working through that process right now. And that's the best that I can do. I think that would be another question for the Latin American office.
Muchísimas gracias. La siguiente es,
Thank you very much. The next one is related to how do we provide follow-up to any findings during the inspection, and does the FDA deem a reinspection necessary? What would the cost be, and who needs to cover for that?
If we do a reinspection, that would be covered, the reinspection costs for the inspection itself would be covered by FDA. That's our job. That's part of our job. Scheduling a reinspection and documenting that, that's all part of FDA's role. The firm's responsibility is to make the corrections on site and make sure that they're corrected, and at whatever cost those are. So if that means installing a washer dryer and they finished installing it, and they document it and send a letter to FDA that says they have, then the reinspection will be based on that letter and their documentation in support of that. That's the best answer I can give you. Reinspections do happen. They're driven by priorities of public health protection first, and then down the road. So that's what we're going to focus on first, is public health issues.
Gracias.
Thank you. The next question is there a priority for the types of products? I'm sorry, is there a prioritization in relation to the types of products to choose the farm to be inspected?
Yes, most definitely. They're going to base that prioritization on past history of foodborne illness outbreaks and susceptibility of the product to potential contamination by bacteria. So there is definitely a prioritization based on that. So it is going to look at the history, how often, where the products come from, the commodity involved, and what is its history as it's been imported in the United States. And what are the corrective actions that the country of origin or the farmers in the region have done to correct for previous problems that have been identified. So that's where that's at right now.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. It seems that the issue on who pays for the inspection is not yet too clear. We would really appreciate it if you could once again clarify who pays for the inspection. And in relation to reinspection, we're being asked, or we're being told that it seems that they said that FDA would charge approximately $300 the hour from the moment in which the investigator was on board the plane. Is that right? Is that still right?
And to my knowledge, that is not correct. I would have to check with the Latin American office and the Caribbean, but as in my previous foreign trips, I've not been required to collect or issue any bills or anything of any nature like that. So the inspection work is part of our job, and there is no charge to do an inspection. And a reinspection, to my knowledge, there is no charge for that either. So I'm not sure where that information is coming from. I could be wrong, and I would expect Jason or someone from the Latin American office to correct me on that.
We'll have to look into that answer, and we can address it during the last webinar next week.
Thank you.
Okay, muchísimas.
Thank you very much. These are all the questions that we have for today. Thanks to all for your comments and for participating, for those who have asked for the presentation and the video. We are currently sharing all the information and all the presentations from the webinars with our participants and with our IICA offices. As soon as we have the process ready, we're going to be letting you know. We thank our speaker for today, for his time, for the wonderful presentation. And we invite you once again to participate with us during the last webinar to be held next Wednesday. And thanks a lot to our partners in this initiative, the FDA Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Thanks a lot to all, and may you have a wonderful day.